Hi, fellow Delphi nerds. This is how it works with Holger, and modified the logo a little bit because I've been talking about web development a lot lately, and that's what this episode is also going to focus on, web development. Something funny up ahead, because the thing with web development is that web developers just develop their user interfaces much differently than we are used to as Delphi developers. I wanted to call this Holger's dirty little tricks of web design, but I was like, you can't use dirty little tricks as a marketing tagline. So I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says that instead of saying dirty little tricks, I should say unveiling the art of cleverness. So today we will not explore any dirty little tricks. No, instead we will be unveiling the art of cleverness. Let me also preface one thing. Humans are creatures of habit, and sometimes this kind of triggers some misinformation that was not my intention. TMS Web Core can be used with any CSS framework, but not only with a CSS framework. No, you can write your custom CSS if you want to. So today we will write custom CSS not using a framework. This will also give me the chance to explain to you how HTML works together with CSS, because that is sometimes also still a little bit of a struggle for Delphi developers, how these two interact with each other. In this specific episode, we'll start with buttons. Something, as a Delphi developer, you've used them right from the start. And this is where we as Delphi developers already go wrong when we look at web development. Let me show you. So this is a VCL application. You've seen dozens of them, if not thousands of them. And we have a button component. We drop a button. We might drop two buttons. And then we can define our properties, what happens if we click on the button, and so on. If you want to align those buttons, we have grid panels, and or flow panels, which will make them automatically align, or we can use toolbars. That's what we are used to. So as soon as we think of a button in HTML, we think of, oh, there is an HTML component or an HTML tag called button. That's what we need to use if we want to develop something that contains a button, right? Well, the web thinks differently. And if this will blow your mind and you're like, what did I learn all these years? Well, I had the same kind of experience a couple of months ago when I looked deeper into HTML, CSS, and how it all works internally. So let's take this page, for example. It's a page about game development, IGN.com. And here we see a bunch of buttons, right? It's a row of buttons. And if we hover over it, we can click on it. So that's by definition a button. And as Delphi developers, we immediately like, okay, so we have a component that's a button, and we have properties that allow us to make the button rounded. This is how we approach this. The web, completely different. If we go into the developer console, I'm also going to leave the mobile view. That's not going to help us here. So with this, I click on the button right here. I also align it to the upper right corner, like so. Sorry. I'll also align it to the right corner. And what we see is, if we go onto this button element, this is a div, and that is an A HTML element. A as in anchor, link. There is no button. If you look on this page, there isn't a single button that serves as a button. And the web developer in this case picked the A element to have the ability to navigate to a different page, to navigate to a link. That's what we learned. So how does this look like a button? And that's exactly where CSS comes into place. HTML, these tags here, are literally just the structure, the taxonomy of your document, plus the content. For example, here you have the content movies inside of this A element. So here, if you click here, this is like the movies text, and that is even wrapped in another div element to get additional structure. Why do you need structure in an HTML document? To reference different parts using your CSS. And that is, in my opinion, the most important thing to understand, that in an ideal world, you have your HTML just consisting of tags, and these tags have certain classes associated with them, and these classes serve for the look and feel of your page. And if this is all a little bit overwhelming, think about what you've been doing for all these years. You had a div element, and this div element served as a container for things that were in there. And then, for example, if you have used the button element in the past, that was something where in between the button element, you defined the text, the caption that appeared inside of the button. However, that is just something that was predefined in your browser. So looking at the CSS, which you get here on the right, if you go to the styles in the developer console, you see all these CSS tags, how they are applied. And you can see that here is actually a definition for the A tag. And on top of it is the definition for the class. I won't get into the specificity of CSS. I'm going to do that in a later talk. I just want to do an example first, so you get a feel for how this all works. So from top to bottom, that is what is applied to the different HTML tags. And you can either, in CSS, pick an element, like here, the A, or a class preceding with a dot, like here. So if you look here at this A element on this page, you have the element A, and the class, perfect example, there is no class. So we go up here, the div element here, class, and there are the classes that are assigned to this element. And this is the key, also the elements that are contained within. So you have a parent-children structure. And this is something, obviously, you've seen in lots and lots of my videos. When we look at the domain object model, an HTML tag can have children elements, and these tags can have children elements of their own. By the way, that led me to a wonderful ChatGPT question the other day, where I asked ChatGPT, how do I get the first child? And I already had a CSS document there, and ChatGPT told me that it could not help to answer any family-related questions. It could only answer programming-related questions. It was Copilot, to be precise. Copilot is based on ChatGPT, but Copilot then said, it can't help with any family-related issues. It can only answer programming issues. So in this case, I had to be a little bit more specific, that I wanted the first element child of a HTML tag. So that was kind of funny. So going from here, what we will do today, I will explain in great detail how you can basically use HTML, style it with CSS, and then use the completely different A element as a button. And the reasoning behind it is you want to use the feature of the anchor tag, which is that you can immediately go to a different link, for example, and still make it appear like a button. You'll also learn how you can round the corners of this one and the last one, because these are the first and the last, right? So you can actually, in CSS, modern CSS, you have things like this, that you can phrase it very, very easily, that you want to do something for the first, the last, or for all the odd ones, even ones. This is all possible. I'm going to start off slow. In future videos, we're going to do more detailed stuff on all the different things. And again, this does not use Bootstrap. This does not use Tailwind. This is pure HTML with CSS. So that can be used in any of your projects if you want to build it from the ground up. However, you can also use it in existing projects that do use a CSS framework. It is not something you would not have to learn to understand these frameworks. This is basic knowledge that will help you to understand CSS frameworks better. These frameworks just do these things internally and it might look like magic to you, but instead you are then able to incorporate this into your own projects and also make modifications to existing CSS frameworks because you understand what's going on under the hood. As always, when it comes to tinkering with the web, I use Visual Studio Code because we can edit CSS and HTML really comfortably. And we also have Copilot available in this, which helps us with the syntax and everything. Just don't make the mistake to think like, oh, I can use this to generate my pages automatically. That's still a little bit of an experiment in my opinion. However, it always gets you started to get the syntax right. That is really helpful in the beginning. So on my computer, I created a folder which is called web_CSS button live, and this is the content of the folder. So I'm going to create two files, index.html, which is our HTML document, and another file, the style.css, which will contain our styles in CSS format. Note that your Visual Studio Code automatically says CSS and HTML. So at this point, Visual Studio Code knows what you're doing. With regards to the HTML document, just press exclamation mark, enter. You have the document. You can have a title, CSS button, example. And then from there, we want to have the CSS, this file here, linked to the HTML. And this is why Copilot is so helpful. It sees the CSS file in our project, and this is the tag we need to add. So I just press tab, and I'm good to go. Command S or Control S, depending if you're on Mac or Windows, and we're good to go. So at this point, I can click Go Live because I have the Live Server plugin installed. I've shown this in previous videos of mine, and I will use two very important browser plugins today. Number one is it's called the ColorZilla plugin. So this one here, if we go to, I don't know if I just look for ColorZilla. And the other one I'm going to use is the Web or What Font plugin. And that will help us to copy the visual appearance of the page here. So I go here, for example, and in order to find out what color they use, I can say pick color from page, and I move over here. And in the title bar, you see which color. I click on the color, and here I have the color, and it has been copied to the clipboard. So this way, I can get different appearances quickly from web developers because I'm not a web developer. I don't have an artistic education, so color is a very strange experiment to me. So I have to rely on professionals to get the contrast right, for example. So, and here, what font? You just hover over it and you see it's Inter. Inter is very popular these days because it's a variable font, which the var means right there. So what this means is this font can be scaled to any size and also to any weight, meaning like thin, bold, and whatsoever. So this means variable font. So instead of having to specify all the different things you need from a certain font, you just load it. And I'll show you how that works as well. So let's go from here. We have our index.html, it's empty. And if I go to the HTML, you see it is empty indeed. And let's specify some styles. And again, Copilot, very helpful. So to start with the font, we go to Google Font, and we type Inter. And here is the Inter Google Font. This is the wonderful font. And you see we have it in all different thicknesses, up to black to thin. And you also can scale it to any size you may desire. So you go to Get Font, Get Embed Code, and then we want the import statement for our CSS, this right here. So right click, copy. And of course, I could exclude certain things here to make the download a little bit smaller. In this case, I'm not going to focus on that. I explained that in a different video about Google Fonts. So we go here, and I just paste that import. So now my CSS loads the font automatically. And with this, I can start with my default definitions for everything. This is just a good reset. That means the margin of the page is 0, the padding is 0, and the box sizing is border box. That means that is very important if you size things, how the size of a box is calculated. We don't want to dive too deep into that. And while I haven't typed anything, it immediately gives me, or Copilot immediately suggests, hey, for your body, because I've defined Inter as my font, this is a pretty good setting that you could use. So I'm just going to press Tab. I'm going to get rid of the line height. I'm going to get rid of the color because I don't want to change that. And the background color, if you don't want clear white, you have something like this. This is like a milder white, I would think. Let's see here. Yeah, it's not white. It's like a subtler white, which is not supposed to be so harsh on the eyes. Okay. With that, if we go into the index HTML, and then in the body, you write something like h1, hello world. At this point, the h1 element, right, has certain characteristics that we do not overwrite. We're not touching it, so this is default, so to speak. So if I go to the thing, to the produced HTML page, we see that we don't have any borders or anything anymore. It literally starts in the upper left corner, and it's the h1 element. If we look at the developer console, we see the color, we see the font, 32 pixels. We have an excellent contrast. That's what you see in the accessibility. So that's what I mentioned when I say I don't create my own colors and stuff. I always use what web developers do. And the interesting thing is if we click on this, you see here all the things that are applied in the order. So first thing is this, that's being applied, and then the h1 tag. And now you wonder, where does this h1 tag come from if we didn't define it? And that's exactly the key. This is in your browser, in your user agent style sheet. The Chrome browser, in this case, has a default. And that means as soon as we don't define anything, the browser takes over with the defaults. In this case, it means that the h1 is a block element, when it has a certain font size and all that kind of stuff. So if we go into the style and overwrite h1, like so, this is the tag, and we say, for example, I want the font size to be 45 rem, or, well, rems, so that's the very, very difficult part of our CSS that might be overwhelming in the beginning. There's not just pixels, there's also other units, and one of the most important ones is rem or m, right? Rem. It goes back to the root element, and the root element size in this case is 16 pixels. What's the advantage of this? Well, very, very simple. If somebody, very big. If somebody defines in their browser a different zoom level or accessibility modifications like large fonts or medium fonts, this will change it if you don't overwrite it like we did before. Right now, we overwrite it, it will always be 16. So it's actually better to take this out. Let's do like 5 rem. And here we have a big hello world. The important thing is, if you look here, that now the h1 is on top and it overwrites the font size, then comes our default definitions, and then come the h1 definitions of the browser, but the font size, which is usually 2 is overwritten. That's the key thing, okay? So the difference between rem and m refers to the parent element. So, and the rem refers to the root element. So the root element is the root element of the document, which is this HTML document if you have a different font definition there. I don't want to confuse you. In this case, there's not that big of a difference, but browser definitions for font the defaults are usually in m, not in rem. So in this case, 5 rem gives us this size. If you now have the zoom, for example, I'm trying to do this now. You can see if I zoom in, this whole thing applies, and recalculates. And if you have the rem font set, the proportions will stay in place. That was just basically a little excursion into the world of CSS about the basic principles. The second one is if you have a dot and, for example, have a container. And this is a class that you can assign to a tag as well, and it applies to the tag itself and all the children. So for example, I can say here with the container, I want a max width of 50 rem. Wonderful, huh? These measurements. And I want a margin of 0 auto. And that means that that's something that people use as a default, basically, that we have it centered. And then here we say padding 2 rem and 1 rem. That is again if we look at this, I can basically the two, let's do, for example, here 10 rem. You can see that nothing happens because our element is not in the container yet. So that's the most important thing. So in order to apply container to our document, we have to wrap this in here, like so. So now the hello world is a child of the container div, which has the class container, which means it uses this. And if we go over to the example, we see that it is indeed implied. And if we click, we get all the different things that we did define for our hello world, but also for the div right here. This div has, as you can see, the padding 10 on top and the bottom, and 1 rem on the left and the right. So the two values are basically the vertical and then the horizontal. And if you specify 4 numbers, you can basically get more specific, like top, bottom, left, right, and these kind of things. And we use values that are not this drastic. So I say 2 rem. So 2 rem in this case means 32 pixels, 1 rem is 16 pixels. And if, for example, you have the young kids that have very, very good eyes, they say, oh, I don't need it that big. They have their browser default configuration set to 12 pixels. So that means this will then be 24 and this will be 12. So it all scales automatically based on the browser settings. That's the key thing to remember if you use REMs, okay? And the container is used because this is still pretty manageable for our eyes, right? But imagine you have a very, very big screen, then your eyes will not be able to look from left to right. So what you do here, you limit the vision, basically that it's everything inside of the container is a maximum of 50 times 16 pixels wide. That's what you say, nothing more. And here the same thing, the vertical border is 0. And the other one is auto, means it is always going to be centered. So back to the document. We don't want hello world. We want a button, right? That's our, so we do here the H1, style your own button. And now the crazy things are going to start. So I said, like, these IGN people, they use this. And Copilot already gives us a hint how it will work. So we have here, we had like latest, and then we had, sorry, here, we had more, we had latest, and what were the other ones? Let me look that up here so I have it. And with that, if we look at the HTML now, this is a surprising thing, it looks nothing like a button. It looks like a normal link, right? And this is exactly where our developer brain as Delphi developers needs to make the big jump if we want to go to the web and want real web development with responsiveness and all these kind of things. This is what we have to accept, that in web development, we don't have a clear mapping from HTML tags to what it looks like. The looks like is the CSS, not the HTML tag. That is something we just have to accept because the components are not, there is no such thing as components, so to speak, on the web. There is just a taxonomy and the content in the HTML and the CSS, the cascading style sheets, cascading because you have a top and a bottom and an order or priority, how these things are being applied. That's it. And these style sheets, they apply the style to your tags according to their specificity, meaning they have classes. They can also have an ID. That is something we use all the time. In order to link to the HTML tag in TMS Web Core, we use the ID tag in order to specify one particular element, for example. And in this case, we want to style these A elements differently. I'm going to do this very, very detailed. And how I do this is I'm going to move the browser over to the right here. So you can literally see when I make the changes, how the browser will, or how these changes will affect the browser. I think that would be very helpful. So we go over into the style CSS and we want to style the A tab, right? That's our aim here, to style the A tag so that it looks like a button. That's the thing. So that's exactly what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to name this because this is the specific IGN button. That's how I'm going to name it. The funny thing is Copilot is cheating now because Copilot is, of course, linked to my GitHub. And the example I prepared this is in my GitHub. So this is literally what the definition for me was in the end. But we're going to start slowly. So the background color is what we will start with. The background color is, what's the background color? Well, we get that from here. So we go here, pick a color, pick it, and then we insert it. That's how we do it. So now we have our background color, the gray, in there. From there, right now, if we save this, the background color is applied. No, it isn't. Because, and this is what we need to do, we need to have the class added to, and so I press Alt or the Option key, and then I say class equals, and the class that I want to use is IGN button for all of my A elements. Now if I save now, see, the background is now the background of the gray button. By the way, this doesn't make any sense. Let's set this back to white so the contrast is better. Perfect. Now, the color of the text is supposed to be black, so we can write black. So that's our text color, right? So still have these crazy underlines. So what we can do there is we can say text decoration. Text decoration is none. We don't want any text decoration. So now the underline goes away and it just looks like normal text. The mouse pointer still changes. That's another reason why people use the A element for buttons, because the mouse pointer changes, okay? And from there, we can say the padding. Padding is margin with background. That's how I remember it all the time. So we do, again, horizontal. If I do it like this, it's going to be on all edges, 0.8. So if I save this, see, we have 0.8 rem on all edges. So if this confuses you, for example, I can also say 12 pixels, right? And if I say 12 pixels here, and let's do 24 pixels on the X, they get wider, okay? So instead of that, I'm going to do, for example, 0.8 rem and for example, on the X, I'm going to do 1.5 rem to make them wider a little bit, okay? Or let's do 2 to make them really nice buttons. Okay, perfect. Almost, right? It's not really looking that great. And the problem is that right now, these things are just being added next to each other. They also, because we added the padding, that they go, you know, they basically intervene with the line above. So what you can do is you have to make them a block element, like so, because by default, they are the A element is basically not is an inline element, and it starts basically where it type. Because if you insert an anchor into your document, it goes into the flow of the text. That's what we call an inline element. And a button is a block element. But that's also not what we want, because now each element literally takes up the whole row each time. So also not what we want. So there is a specific one which is called behave like inline, but give me the features of a block element. And that's called inline block. And there we go. So now we have already, believe it or not, our buttons. Crazy, huh? It's literally just flipping property or the behavior of certain things so that they fall in line on the page. That's how you have to see it. And the order of things is determined by your HTML, but not the appearance. The appearance is always designed by the style sheet. And so far, and even the font and everything, with the font family, inter and everything, that is all taken care of. So if we go here, or if I use my what is the font, we see that it's inter. Okay, so that all works because we have the import and we set the font family, the body element. So the container and the button are children of that. So it is being taken over, inherited. It cascades down to there. That's how you can also visualize these things. Okay, so another thing we could do is if we hover over it, we want a different color. So back in the day, when I learned CSS for the first time, we had to do something like this: IGN button, and then we had to repeat, and then something like this, for example. And we had to then, for example, you could then say background color is black and the color is white, for example. Something you could do. Save. And now when you hover over it, you have these wonderful effects. Of course, the problem with this is you had to repeat the class name, and it got longer and longer. So there was like special tools, preprocessors, where you could write something like this, an ampersand, and then you could do the same thing. And Copilot sees this, and helps me. So I'm just going to press tab and have it typed in. So instead of this, we can simply say, repeat the everything that you're in, and then add, this is formally called a pseudo class, on hover when the mouse is over. Do this, so we save it, and as soon as we're over here and hover, we get the black button, so to speak. Perfect. So that is taken care of as well. So the final piece of the puzzle is we need a means to address the first and the last. And we can do that in CSS. We can address the first child and the last child. But the problem is, right now, the child is, or the parent of our A element is the div container, which is also, and this is the problem, which is also the parent here. So the first child of the div is also the h1. So instead of using this, I'm going to inside another div, name it buttons. So this is not going, and again, there you see, it has no visual impact, even though there is something. So, and back in the day, divs were taught in HTML courses as frames and something crazy like that. No, nothing. This is just an element to structure. As long as I don't assign any visual appearance to buttons, it doesn't have an effect. However, if, for example, I say buttons, and then I assign a background color of Rebecca purple and save, this div becomes visible because now it has a background color assigned to it. Okay, and buttons, of course, is encompassing this whole area right here. Okay, so but for buttons, I don't want to style anything, at least not yet. So let's keep it as is, empty, comment it out because otherwise it's going to break the CSS. And the only thing I want to use buttons for is to have a common, basically here in this case, I want to have a common ancestor for all my buttons here, which is this div. So what I can do is now in the button, I can say if the button is the first child, I can do things like, for example, border radius, because we want to have the round here on the left. So this is top left, bottom left, and here it is top right, bottom right. So what we do here, just to, again, to show you how the different steps go, but border radius, Let's say I make it 1 rem, or let's do it even easier. We do it for all of them. Let's say I say border radius 1 rem. So now all the buttons have a border radius, and this is actually what buttons look like, right? So if you check on other web pages how many web pages use buttons like this, you'll be surprised how many web pages use the A element and not the button element. Or they have their own element, you know? It really doesn't mean anything. The HTML standard lets you use any tag you want and then associate any appearance you want in the CSS with it. You know, that's how it works at the core. So if we assign it to the button class, all the buttons have the rounded corners, but we want just the first and the last. So what we do here, we move this border radius, and then there's the pseudo class first child, which means the first child of IGN button, which if we look here, if the buttons element is here, so this is the first child, so latest now has the border radius, but we don't want them on the right. So how do we do that? Well, it's the same thing with everything. You can specify 4 coordinates instead of just 1 or 2. For example, you can say like this. Then you have, as you can see, different ones on the left and the right. But what we want to do is we want to do them like this. 0, 0, 1 rem. There you go. That's the left. So only the left top and the left bottom. That's the order how they do it. So it's this one, this one, this one, and then this one. Okay? It's crazy. I know. Don't worry about it. I struggle with it as well, but that's just how they aligned it. You know, top left, top right, lower right, lower left. Those are the ones. And with the last child, it is like this, right? It has the top left is 0, top right is 1, bottom right is 1, and bottom left is 0. So if we save this, we now have the visual appearance that they have. And you might say like, this is too close to here. So guess what? This is where the buttons class comes in. So we can say for the buttons frame, we can say margin top, for example, and we say 1 rem. And now it moves down because this whole group now moves down 1 rem, and you can do 1.5 rem. You can also do it on the left. So it doesn't have to be margin top 2 rem. You can also do margin left 1 rem, for example. And then it moves like this too. There you go. Never do a space between the unit and the number. CSS is very picky how you basically define your things. Never forget the apostrophe, the semicolon at the end, and it's also good standard to have a colon and then basically a space before you continue. So that's all you can do. And you can, of course, you can also do the margin without specifying top left. You simply say margin 2, which makes it top, bottom, left, right, 2 rem. Okay? In this case, we just want the top. Okay? So that's it. This is already perfect. It will work. You would have your web page. So if, for example, if you were to here for the latest news, you could do right here for the latest, you could do https horgerscode.com, save, and then we click on latest, and there's my web page. Okay, that's the reason why people use these things. Okay, so let me move this back to here. So the functionality is already there, but now the responsiveness, you know, that's always a problem, because if we make this bigger, okay, but now comes the problem. If we make this smaller, in this case, okay, we have to find it in a way that it will fit, okay, perfectly designed. I could stop the example now and tell you, well, that's how it is, right? So now let's do here 3, 4 rems, that the buttons get wider, okay? So at this point, you end up with something like this, which is not really nice, right? At some point, they should get stacked. And also, what I don't like is that I have to specify these sizes here, because there could be a time when some of the terms get longer or shorter, especially thinking of TMS Web Core, if you generate these things dynamically. So a good idea is to leave it to the web browser to always fill up the whole row, right? So you can do that very, very easily with something I explained in one of my earlier videos. We can just say display for the buttons to flex. And what happens then, they melt together because we have a flex box here. And then we say gap. And once again, we say 1/2 a rem, for example. Boom. So we have a space between all the different items. And we can then take the padding away on the horizontal. And then it's like, what's happening now? Well, we force them to be block elements here. So we have to take this out. And at this point, each element is exactly as wide as its text. You can see that here, right? But that's not really what we want. We want that the whole column gets filled. So what we do is each button will have a width of 100%. And with that, we get the alignment as desired, I would say. Okay, so as right now, the button or the buttons take up the whole size of the container all the time. Okay, and if we make it smaller, it shrinks. Perfect. Okay, if you have this set up, you can't have them wrap, by the way, just to add this out there, because you have them set to 100%, they always take 100% and wrap right away. So that is something that we will actually be doing a little bit later for the mobile view. Okay, so with this, the text should be centered. So we go to the IGN button and say text align center. Now the text is centered again. We're almost there because the last thing this works great here, but as soon as I add more, let's add 2 more in here. PlayStation and Xbox. It gets a little bit crowded, right? It still works, but it's not what I would like. It would be great if they were stacked at some point. And that is something we can do very, very easily by adding a so-called media query. Okay, so what we will define is that we say as soon as you reach a certain width, or as soon as you reach a certain, go below a certain width, then basically change the appearance of our buttons in the following way. Because if you stack the buttons, you don't want the corners anymore, right? You don't want this or that corner anymore. So what we can do is we can say add media, then we say max width. So this is valid up to a max width of 668 pixels. Of course, we could also, which would be better, specify this in rems. So we would have to calculate 768 divided by 16, which is 48. So we can say 48 rem. So starting at 48 rem, we want to do up to 48 rem, we want to do the following. We want to do buttons, our class, changes the flex direction to column. If I spell it correctly, it will also work. So here we go back to our button example. I save. And now if I go smaller, boom, they're on top of each other. Maybe that's a little bit early. Let's do 35. There you go. So now we have the mobile view as well. Okay, so the 30, that's a good thing, I think. Yeah. So now we have the mobile view, but what doesn't look good is the fact that we have the problem with the Xbox and latest, because it's the first child and last child, is getting those rounded corners, which we don't want. We either want them all in this case, or we don't want them at all. So what you can do is you say, either if you want them all, you do it like this, that all of them get the border radius. But of course, it would still get overwritten by the first child and last child, because there we set a different border radius. So what we do is we set the IGN button basically first child set it to 0, and then the same for the last child. There you go. Now we have for the mobile view, nice buttons here. And then you go, as soon as you go bigger, we get them next to each other. Perfect. And again, let me emphasize this. There's no bootstrap. It's all self-written CSS and very, very simple HTML, which just contains our content. With regards to TMS Web Core, you would be dropping these A components on the form, which is a label component in TMS Web Core, but you could also generate them in the DOM yourself when you, for example, get a web service result for a menu that is supposed to be dynamic. You can generate it like this by generating the A tags, and your CSS then automatically styles it that it looks like a menu. And of course, you can hook up events to these items. Instead of using the href, you keep the href as it is. You'll find this in my book, for example, how you can then link to these elements with the onClick event and all these kind of things to interact with them. However, what you should take away from this video today is the fact that the HTML only determines the structure of your document and the content, and the style comes from the CSS. And the reason why your documents back in the day could be used without a CSS file, because the browser has the default CSS, which is called the user agent style shield formally. And frameworks like Bootstrap, Tailwind, they have styles associated with them. They do this for you. If you use the button tag, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes, what they do in order to make it appear like a button. They use the same kind of things like background colors, padding, and all these things. That's just something that you should always remember when you create your web designs for TMS Web Core, that you have the full power with TMS Web Core to create these things any way you would like. There is no limitation to any specific framework. You're not tied down to anything. You're completely in control. TMS Web Core is giving you the shot to use HTML and CSS as you desire and link it. And that's the key with TMS Web Core. You can easily link it to Delphi or Object Pascal code and use a programming language that you're used to. You don't need to use JavaScript. You can use Delphi code. Still, CSS and HTML, even if you use the components from TMS, which give you a great start for CSS and for the visual appearance. However, as soon as you look into real responsive web applications, looking at CSS and HTML is really, really worth a shot. So in a nutshell, I really hope you liked the first episode of How It Works with Holger under the tagline, Unveiling the Art of Cleverness, or a comment, or if you just call it Explore Dirty Little Tricks of Web Development, whatever you prefer. Maybe the TMS marketing department is going to call the shots here and is going to pick a title. I don't know. But remember, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the TMS channel. There'll be more content like this in the future, because I want to make sure that you are able to build your TMS Web Core web applications with the best responsive design possible, because I want to make sure that you know all those dirty little tricks that web developers do and make it appear they have some kind of very specific tool set, but instead they're just redefining the styles of simple HTML tags like I've shown you here today, the anchor tag. Stay safe. See you soon. Bye-bye.